Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out so early on a Sunday morning. So we're here at Cliveden, which has always been a stage for drama. Rule Britannia was performed for the first time here. Queen Victoria stayed here. Nancy Astor lived here. The Cliveden set gathered here. Churchill drank here. Christine Keeler ignited the Profumo affair. And even Meghan Markle spent her last night before one of her weddings at this hotel. So, how appropriate to be joined by three remarkable masters of storytelling whose work has shaped countless dramas. So, first of all, Patrick Marber, who graduated from stand-up comedy to writing and directing award-winning plays such as Closer, as well as acclaimed screenplays like Notes on a Scandal. Mark Rosenblatt has directed productions from the National Theatre to Tokyo, and his debut play Giant that stormed the West End is now going to Broadway. I can say that now, right? Yeah. And Andrew Davies, the screenwriter behind some of television's most unforgettable adaptations, from House of Cards and Pride and Prejudice to War and Peace. Together they've won BAFTAs, Oliviers, and Emmys. So we're very lucky. So, Andrew, you started life as a teacher. Mark, you directed plays, and Patrick, you were performing stand-up. How did you all become writers, and what specifically drew you to script writing? Should we start at the end?
I was always a writer from childhood. I think the thing is we are all writers when we're 7 or 6 or that sort of age, and the thing is it gets forced out of a lot of people, largely due to the curriculum in secondary school. But anyway, I liked it so much, and that I always did it, along with being a teacher, because my dad told me I ought to get a job that pays the bills, and then I could write what I liked in my spare time, and that's what I did for a long time, and I didn't give up teaching till I was 50. But it was by then in a soft job in a training college. And I started off with poetry, but nobody will pay you to write poems, unless you're,
I was saying before, imagine having Andrew Davies as a teacher.
Yeah.
And what did you say to me? You said you weren't Andrew Davies at the time.
No, that's right. I was, yeah.
Mark?
Yeah, I directed plays for 20 plus years, and I had opportunistically occasionally written a bit for film, but only adapted other people's things, and had never seen myself as a writer particularly. I certainly never imagined that I'd write a play, and I thought playwrights were people like Patrick, and people who could pull off this extraordinary thing of holding an audience in a live setting for 2 hours with theme and plot and characters, and I just thought that's something that I could serve as a director, but not as a writer. So it was a completely chance experience a few years ago where I had an idea as a director for a play for Giant, what became Giant, and when I pitched it to a producer who is also a director who ended up directing the production, he was the one that said, listened to me talking about the idea and said, well, why don't you write it?
For the one person in this room who hasn't seen Giant, do you just want to summarise the
Oh yeah, it's a play about Roald Dahl and his anti-Semitism, and this moment in the summer of 1983 when he's on the verge of publishing The Witches, and I've sort of extrapolated from the press outcry at the time an article that Dahl wrote in the press about Israel-Palestine, which was shot through with some pretty explicit anti-Semitic tropes, and imagined his publishers descending on his house to try and tease out of him a public apology, which he never gave. So yeah, that's what Giant is. But I never planned to be a writer, and I'm startled to be here right now.
And your first play, you won an Olivier Award for.
Yeah.
So that's pretty good
It's
going
pretty
for a
annoying,
first
isn't it? I'm done.
Patrick.
Well, I'm a very reluctant writer. I'm not one of those writers who enjoys writing particularly, except very occasionally a sort of 2 or 3 hour burst of inspiration, which happens about once a year, where I didn't know that I'd written it, where it feels like it's your unconscious writing, and it just splurges out and you're amazed that 4 or 5 hours has passed. I've lived my life really as a procrastinator, and I was always the kid at school, late with homework, and then at university, staying up all night, chomping on Pro Plus to finish my essay. I've always been in crisis, and for reasons I can't fathom, I've chosen to continue to be in essay crisis as an adult. And I've been in that crisis now for 30 years professionally. And I'm completely mystified as to why I would give myself homework as punishment my whole life. It's very mysterious to me, but I do love coming up with a funny line or a speech or an idea that I think might communicate to a crowd of people. And I used to love that when I was a stand-up comedian, when I had a good gig. And I loved it when I did TV comedy with Steve Coogan and the Day-to-Day team and creating Alan Partridge and all of that. So I think I'm really old-fashioned showbiz. I just like to entertain people. And I still have a slight performer gene in me, but I don't know, I just love seeing words on a page that I've written and I didn't know how I wrote them. So it has magic for me. And I guess when I was young and could still read books, I can't read books anymore. I'm too dithery in my concentration. I wanted to give back the pleasure that books gave me to other people. I wanted to see if I could be like my heroes. And I can't, because my heroes were James Joyce and Samuel Beckett. And I don't really do what they did. I'm a much more commercial operator than them. But that was who I longed to be, was to be a great, literary figure. And I'm not really a literary figure, I'm much more at the sleazier end of the business, where, all of our work is, the three of us were judged by the public very firmly. There's nothing like a play to give you a slap in the face. Because no, that doesn't work. You're going to have to cut that. You're going to have to change that. It's brutal, but very pleasurable to hear an audience laugh or to hear the silence you've managed to create. That's very, very exciting. It's probably all to do with control and not feeling like I had any power as a child, I imagine.
Okay, so
I don't know, you're a writer too, Natalie. What's in it for you?
Pretty agonising, but that's for next year. So talk to me about how the script writing process begins for you. Is it solitary? Is it collaborative? What happens?
Writing for television is very collaborative usually. I talk to some nice, clever people who are usually at least 20 years younger than me, maybe 40 years younger than me, about whatever it is we're doing, and we're basically trying to make each other laugh, I guess, and bring pleasure to each other. I guess when I'm writing, I'm first of all trying to write something that I like, that amuses me, or entertains me, or moves me to tears. Secondly, you know, I want to make Stella laugh and Laura laugh, and you know, they're mostly women. Funny that. And that's really the process. And then finally, I have to go away on my own and actually write a script.
So you have to face the
that
solitude.
is sometimes quite hard work, you know. But you look forward to the bits where you get in the flow and you surprise yourself, or the character starts surprising you and behaving in a way that you wouldn't have anticipated, and you think, oh, that's good, and you look at your watch and you see, you know, an hour and a half has passed without you noticing, and that's the pleasure of it, really. But I have this thing called euphoric recall, which is a lovely phrase I came across in a film about drug addicts, really, and drug dealers, and it's a thing that happens when to addicts who are in recovery, but they're nostalgic about the pleasures of when they were heroin addicts, and they say, oh, it's wonderful. And I'm like that about almost everything, really. And I remember the good bits rather than the bad bits.
Patrick, Mark, do you relate to that addiction feeling when it comes to the writing?
No, not at all. Well, I am addicted to writing. I have to do it, and I feel guilty when I'm not doing it. But that doesn't mean I do it. I don't. I was thinking about this today. But, my wife mentioned that there was an article about David Hockney, who, to my knowledge, paints every single day of his life. It's just what he does. Whereas I don't write every day. I'll do anything to not write every day. I talk every day, which is a form of writing, and I think every day, which is a sort of preparation for writing. But on my computer, my screensaver, this is from Sean O'Casey, who had it. He had it a little. I like to imagine a little tapestry that he had, but I don't know what he had. It was probably just words on a page. But he had on his desk, "Write the play." To remind him every day, write the play. And I have that as my screensaver, and it just chugs across, and I go, oh, piss off. How dare you tell me what I have to do? So no, I don't feel addicted to it, but sort of trapped by it, compelled in a maze.
Sounds an awful lot like addiction to me.
Yeah, well, it is and it isn't.
Thank God for us that you are. The title of this panel is How to Write a Hit Script. Let's start with you, Mark. What would you say the difference is between a hit script and a good script? What's the difference between a hit play and a good play? How do you judge it? Ratings, reviews?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've got such a small amount of data to draw from as a writer because I've written one play, and you know,
it's a hit. It's a monster.
It's a massive,
hit.
yeah.
And it's really good.
Oh, thanks. So it's hot. But I just mean in terms of it from my own experience. It's not like I've had this very sort of startling, extraordinary one-off experience, and I can't sort of talk about the other experiences which I'm sure you guys have had where you've had extraordinary hits and then things that have been terrific but haven't sort of
You're talking about, yes, flops, yes. Yes.
Or good things.
And I hope it never happens to you.
It will.
It's awful.
It will. So I don't know, but in terms of or generalizing, wow. I mean, what connects with an audience? I mean, so many things connect in so many different ways. I think sometimes people just want to laugh, and there are certain kinds of commercial shows that just make people laugh, and in the most fantastically cathartic way, and that in itself creates an appetite for an audience to come and see it more. And then there are things maybe more like Giant, where I happen to write something that met the political moment. I didn't start writing it when we were in this terrible situation in the Middle East. I had the idea in like 2018, which was to sort of explore where, in the case of the play, sort of racist language, extremist racist language blurs with meaningful political discourse. But it turned out that what I was writing about, and particularly writing about Israel and Palestine and anti-Semitism, became tragically, our play was accepted for production on October the 5th, 2023. Wow. And then the world changed 2 days later in terms of the play. And I mean, by the time we opened the play, when we were in previews, the play explores this moment in 1982, which Dahl has written this article about, when Israel invaded Lebanon and besieged Beirut. And as we went into previews, Israel went into Lebanon and began to besiege Beirut. And so, there's a very particular journey with my play, which is that it met a moment. And people, I suppose, my play is an attempt to explore the arguments around that play as well as other things, that debate as well as other things, in a nuanced and hopefully in a nuanced and complex way without hectoring the audience. And I think that it seemed to me that the audience enjoyed being able to sit in a room for a couple of hours and not feel and sort of escape the defensive scrapping of online debate around this particular thing, the kind of finger pointing, and experience a spectrum of argument. And I think theatre is very good at that. In the right mode, it's very good at allowing us to sit back and find the truth of something for ourselves. So I guess, and there were some good jokes in it, and it's about Roald Dahl, so he's a great sort of way in. So there's lots of elements at play that I think meant that something that was exploring something quite niche became something quite global, unexpectedly, and is quite a niche conversation about a minority community, but had a very popular, beloved literary figure that the audience could reach into that conversation through the lens of. So it was just, I can't, and then we had these amazing actors doing amazing work. There's just so many layers and levels of what makes a show work. It's really hard to generalize.
What about you, Patrick? Difference between a hit play and a good play?
Well, Mark is being very modest about what happened with his. A year before his play was put on, it went like fire around the playwriting community. And we were all gossiping and going, that Rosenblatt guy, the young director, he's written a bloody play. God, bastard. Where's it going on? Royal Court, directed by Nick Heitner. Shit, what's it about? Dahl. He's taken a bash at Roald Dahl. That sounds good. Who's in it? John Lithgow. Oh, God, it's a hit. It's a bloody hit. And you just know, you can smell a hit. And that was a hit because it had the right components of merriment and danger and star quality and a great director in a great theatre. I wish I'd taken out shares in Giant at a very early stage. And it's really nothing to do with the piece of work. It's to do with the components around it. I've just directed the producers. And that's a hit because I can talk about all the timing of it. It's a funny musical about, and it's got mad Nazis in it, and that speaks to the current age, but it's not that. It's a peculiar kind of magic that a hit has, where it can communicate on all levels to lots of different age groups. And it's universal because it's just so damn funny and the tunes are good. And it's very simple pleasures that a hit has. Whereas a flop tends to be, in my considerable experience delivering flops, is that it doesn't have a clean message, doesn't have a clean iteration of form and content and the people in it and the venue where it's on. It doesn't feel like a sort of monumental thing. It feels slightly floppy around the edges.
Speaking of flops or floppy around the edges, Andrew, have you ever written a scene that you thought was going to be absolutely sensational only to see it crash and burn in rehearsal?
Yeah, I've had the experience of writing a play that was a massive hit in the West End and a total flop on Broadway straight afterwards, and I never thought it was going to be a hit or anything. It started off as a play for a little studio theatre at the Belgrave Theatre in Coventry. I'd been to see a play there that I thought was dead boring, and I just went, and the director was terribly pleased when I went up to him and said, I could write a play that's tons better than this. But he said, okay, go and do it. And so that it only filled, I had about room for about 40 people this night. I thought, I could fill that place. I could, and my wife was teaching in a primary school in Coventry, and I thought that's absolutely full of material for comedy, tragedy, all kinds of things. And you can do it, you can treat the audience as if they were kids, give them an assembly, hymn, prayer, story, bollocking, which is what an assembly usually is in primary school. And so I did all this, and I thought we could film a studio theatre with primary school teachers from Coventry. So we did that, and it was a big success in this tiny way. And then this producer came up from London and said, I think your play could go to the West End. We went, ha, ha, ha. And he sent it to Glenda Jackson. He didn't know Glenda Jackson. It was like doing the pools or something. Anyway, she picked up the phone and said, I like this, and I'm free from October. I'd been on the fringe of getting something into London for a while, but they were all full of other plays. But when Glenda Jackson wanted to be in something, they would throw plays out of theatres, and so that she could do what she wanted to do. And she went into this. She was a bit big for this little play that I'd written, but it didn't seem to matter. I mean, the audience were ecstatic, the reviews were very good, and suddenly I was earning a lot of money a week. Well, I bought a house in London, and my life had changed, and of course, having played for 6 months to full houses, we were going to Broadway. And we went to Broadway, and everything was going great. The limo, the flowers, all wonderful. I just heard such great things about your play, Mr. Davies. And rehearsal started, and somehow, you know, by the time we got to the previews, the applause was respectful, and you were just thinking, it just needs a bit more oomph or something like that. But I had a bad feeling about it, really. And in those days, I don't know whether it's the same now, there was just one guy's reviews that made all the difference. What's he called? Frank something.
Frank Rich.
Frank, yeah.
The butcher of Broadway.
Yeah. And after the play, we went to Sardi's, which is where you go, and you're sitting there, and even the waiters seem to know before, you know, they have this sardonic smile on their faces, and finally, you know, the reviews come. There's this big pile of newsprint, and you start leafing through, and I remember the smell of it, and you get to it, and the silence deepens and deepens. And the reviews went kind of, it is always a pleasure to welcome Miss Glenda Jackson back to these shores, but what is she doing in this pile of shit by some nonentity called Andrew Davies? That's how I remembered it. In fact, I managed recently to find the review again, which you can do online, and it was quite a balanced review, but it was it was a thumbs down, really. It was a polite thumbs down, and it's awful. I was off solid food for about 3 weeks.
What's the play called?
The play was called.
Mark's going to revive it for you.
I mean, I'm sitting here listening to this in absolute horror.
I wouldn't bother. It was in Coventry. It was called Diary of a Desperate Woman, and when it went to when Glenda was in it, it was called Rose.
Right.
It was one of several things called Rose, but that was another thing against it.
So speaking of reviews, Patrick, do you read your reviews?
Yes, but
How does that make you
very, very quickly though.
Yeah.
So I skim them and I go, yeah, good, shithead, wanker. But it's as quick as that. But they have a star system now, so you don't really have to fully read them. In the old days, you just have to read, prose in vast volume. And theatre criticism was quite a serious thing when I started out in the 90s. They actually had professional theatre critics, which they don't now. They just give the gig to any journalist who can bear it. The age of the pro theatre critic is sort of nearly over, which is very sad. It might be, but now you could just look at the stars and you go, okay, 3 there, 4 there, ooh, 5, oh, 1. But as a director, I read them in full because I feel it's my responsibility when I'm directing something to read anything that the actors might have been stupid enough to have a look at. Because if I go into someone's dressing room and they go, did you read the Telegraph? Yes, I read it, they're wrong, they're stupid, whatever. I need to be able to reassure them that I've read it and I disagree with it and I will secretly agree with it, it doesn't matter. I feel it's a duty of care. When they're reviewing my writing, I read them with less interest in a way. It's a sort of dispassionate disinterest. But I know it affects very much the future of the play and its life in the world. And that you sort of, a play is a little boat that you launch into the world. And, I've got plays, Dealer's Choice there. That was a play from 1995. I wrote it in my 20s, and it's still around, and it's still being done. And you know that if you get good reviews for the originating production, you've got a better chance of longevity, because the play takes on its little momentum, and you're on a journey that might take you into the West End, and then Broadway, and then productions all over the world, if you're lucky. And revivals, and Giant might be with you for the rest of your life as a piece of material that will bring you pleasure and income, and
I'm sure it will.
It can be. It's you just need to find your next Roald Dahl for the role.
Oh no, you don't put him under. He's under enough.
No, you've got to keep generating it, because
Mark's never.
I was told at a very young age with my second play, Closer, Robert Fox produced that in the West End. And he's a brilliant theatre producer, and we've become very close friends. And he said, I'm going to tell you something that is sad but true, but as a playwright, no one's going to hustle for your play like you. You can't rely on producers and theatres and people to just pick up the phone and say they'll revive it. You've got to become your own salesperson. And it was a horrible lesson to learn, because I thought, well, but other people will look after my work, and they do, your agent and so on. But actually, no one hustles like the writer. I don't know, are you good at the hustle, Andrew? Are you good at pushing yourself? I find it hard, but necessary.
No, I don't usually. I don't think. I sort of, I'm quite good at pitching my work to producers, but that's about it, basically.
Yeah, I can't pitch at all. I find it offensive to be asked to pitch. I can write a treatment and go, it's this, take it or leave it, and they go, no, we're going to leave it. And I go, what? Let me in the room and pitch. Still being rejected is painful and awful.
Okay, so what about when it's yourself you're rejecting? I want to kind of get onto the relationship between writer and director, because you've directed plays that you've written.
Yes.
That must be an incredibly difficult experience, to have to be brutal with your own work, to kill your own darlings. What is that like?
I like doing that. I haven't always directed the originating production. Sometimes I've done revivals of my work just to get them on. I like working with directors with a new play, and I like working with myself as well. I like both, but I always know when I'm writing the play whether it's something I might want to direct, or I know, oh, I absolutely don't want to direct this. I just want to be the writer in the room.
How do you know? What are the
I don't know. It's some instinct for what will serve the play best. Is someone else's perspective, or to keep it entirely mine? And I would say that one of the things that I give myself credit for is I'm good at cutting my own work. I don't mind taking an axe to it if need be. And I think that's the stand-up comedian in me, who learned very young that less is more, and leave the audience wanting more. And that Trevor Nunn said a really funny thing. Trevor Nunn, brilliant director, but famous for very long productions, like Nicholas Nickleby and Summerfolk at the National, 4 hours, 9-hour productions. And he said to a playwright called Terry Johnson once, he said, the difference between a hit and a good night out is 10 minutes. 10 minutes. And I know what you meant, but Trevor, no one could direct for as long as Trevor. But it's very true. If you take stuff out, the rest feels much better.
Yeah, Nick Heitner, who directed my play, he ran the National Theatre for 10 years, and he said that. So my play was, when we went into rehearsals, was about nearly 24,000 words long. And he had there's this kind of calculation that if you can get it somewhere between 18 and 20,000 words, there's a calculation of pages, minutes, blah, blah, blah. Some weird metric that is people are loosely interested in. But Nick said that, he said, I like your play, but it's got to come down before 10 o'clock. If we start at 7:30, they need to be on their way out before 10 o'clock. He said the amount of shows that were really good at the National that I programmed or produced, sometimes directed, that finished after 10 o'clock, the difference to the critics' reaction, even like the star ratings, in his view was a difference of time, and less is more, and people just being happy to be on the tube home a bit sooner. And it's a very brutal kind of medium, I think.
Yeah,
it's very live.
Absolutely. It's funny, because there is Emily Maitlis over there. I'm sorry to draw attention. But I used to pitch to actors when I was directing a show, and trying to persuade an actor to be in it. I'd quite often find myself saying, honestly, it's short. You'll be home for news night. You'll be tucked up in bed with your cocoa and news night, I promise. And it was a big pitch. But now actors are so reluctant to take on plays unless they get really handsomely paid. You have to go, you'll be home for the 10 o'clock news. They're really happy about that.
I think this is. I don't actually like the theatre at all. I don't like being in there.
What you mean.
I feel anxious and embarrassed for the actors. You know, if
Yes,
it's
me
not
too.
going
Me
very
too.
well.
It's a terrible business.
I think if you could just be a bit better, or if that guy who wrote it could have written it a bit better, I might be a better audience member and react and laugh and all that. And also, there's this thing, if it's got an interval, you always look at the person that you're with, who is probably someone you like very much and enjoy the company of. And you think, well, we've seen them all now. Nobody new is going to come on. Would we rather go back and listen to some more of that, where they're all having drinks and being jolly on stage and we're having to sit and listen? Or would you rather sit up here in this now empty bar where we get all the barman's attention and we can have a nice chat? And it's very much linked to that, you know, let's not make it too long.
Yeah, no, I agree. Boredom in the theatre is like no other kind of boredom. It's much worse than boredom in a movie or boredom in the ballet or the opera.
You live in terror writing. I mean, I was terrified of it being boring. Yeah.
So when you're writing, question for all of you, do you write with a particular actor in mind when you're creating your central protagonist? Do you think, oh, this is the guy I'd like to play him? Or
I have done. I've written with. Well, it's usually an amalgam of 2 or 3 different actors. Well, it's someone like that could play this part, and sometimes that sort of actor figure ends up playing the part. Sometimes not. So I have, but sometimes the characters are a sort of a blurry, ghoulish, spectral figure, and I've no idea who can play them. And it really varies, and there doesn't seem to be any pattern to it. It's different with a movie because you're quite often, when I take a movie job and I'm a gun for hire, they'll say, here's a book, adapt it, and so actor is attached. So make sure the role remains attractive to such and such an actor. So it's a different brief. But with a play, I've never written a play for someone to be in it. For me, playwriting is the only bit of pure writing I get to do. Movie writing is a totally different thing.
Yeah, when I was writing Giant, I definitely had like a couple of sort of notional ideas of actors who might play Dahl, because it's such a specific type of person. He's very tall and he's just a known voice and tonally. But they were never like, oh, I'm writing it for them. It was just helpful. And when Nick Heitner finally read the play after me writing it, spending like years writing it, and he called me and said, actually, I've read it, I'd like to direct it, and who have you thought about for Dahl? And I said, well, a couple of names. They were English actors, and he said, have you thought about John Lithgow? And I said, no. I had no sense of an American actor. I just never thought grandly in that way. But Nick was looking for a project with John, because they'd worked together before. And so sometimes it comes about that way. You just get this perfect fit of this person who suddenly makes sense of the whole project.
Andrew, how much say do you have in who gets cast for your fabulous adaptations?
I get some. I'm sort of in the mix of people who decide, but I don't get casting votes. And rather like Patrick, when I write, I almost never imagine an actor when I'm doing. Perhaps after I've finished, then I'll think, oh yeah, him or her. But delightfully, a lot of the things I write, these adaptations of classic things, and the heroines are often really young. They're 18, 19. And And so we're going to get really young actresses, probably not as young as that, but often someone who's just out of drama school. And the BBC always, I'm not sure whether they're as good as that, but they would cast unknowns who are good. And that's lovely because people watching it don't think, oh, there's so-and-so, she was great in EastEnders. Now she's Tess of the D'Urbervilles or whatever. They think this is the real person. They just fall in love with the character as played by the actor. Yeah.
Can I just ask you a question about adaptations I've been dying to ask you? Given such high audience expectations of the books that you're adapting, how do you manage to sit down and write and transform these well-loved novels into amazing TV?
Well, one of the ways I like to look at it is when we're reading books, we are all doing our own adaptations as we read. I can't imagine a way of reading where you don't see pictures as you read, and these figures float into your mind, and also you can visualize the action. You know, you can see what's in the foreground and what's in the distance and things like that. And writing it, I'm trying to bring to life my own impression of the book, and also which can be partial. And I get, I have favourite characters, and very much in Pride and Prejudice, for example, I was trying to make the audience see that Darcy is a good guy, or might be a good guy, right from the start. Whereas in the book, you're stuck in Elizabeth's head, and you can't do anything. And she wouldn't write scenes with two men together or a man on his own. But I think I can, so I do. So there's all that, and I've just got very kind of confident, because what else can you do but follow your own nose with these things? I'm not writing to please other people, except I am. I just hope they're pleased with what pleases me. Yeah.
What would you say, I'm going to ask you first, is the most unusual piece of feedback you've ever had from someone reading a script or watching one of your productions?
I very recently had one where I adapted Emma for my local amateur theatre. Just a very straight adaptation, tell the story of the book. And a couple of my telly friends came up from London to see it. And one of them, a guy called Ben Morris, he never read the book. He said, I'd heard of it. And then in the interval, he said, Christ, that Emma, she's a total bitch, isn't she? And I said, yeah. And she is.
To answer your question, I was going to say the most unusual feedback is the no feedback, is when you hand in a script and then it just goes very quiet for about a month, and then you think, oh well, they're taking their time, and then a month becomes 6 months, and you realise, oh, they're never gonna talk to me again. They hate it that much, and then you bump into some other writer who goes, oh, I'm rewriting that movie, and that one you did, and that's how you find out, and that happens in movies quite a lot. That I've rewritten people, I've been rewritten. It's part of the horrible prostitution of the writer self. If you're a gun for hire, that's what you get.
Yeah, I wrote a screenplay of a Somerset Maugham play, and someone else, I left the project. And mutually.
Yeah.
And then someone else took it on who I'd never met in my life. And then you had the weird experience of reading what he'd done. And it's like walking into a room that you have furnished, but things have been moved around. So the chair is in the wrong place. Some of the stuff's gone. The piano's just gone.
Yeah.
And it's very strange. It's like something familiar that has been changed by someone else, and all the things you loved have gone. That good sequence you wrote is just vanished forever, and it's such a strange world. It's such a strange thing.
The silent response is really the thing you most dread, but it's becoming increasingly more common that you don't actually get told you've been fired.
No,
you just kind of recognise it.
That in a way is the worst. They can't even be bothered to tell you you've been sacked.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's making me feel a lot better about if it can happen to you guys. So we're actually nearing the time when the audience is going to ask questions, but I just got one last question to ask you all. If you had your fantasy collaborator who you would work on your next piece of work with, who would it be and why?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, I've got to admit, and I feel a bit smug about this, but I have realised my fantasy, because about 4 or 5 years ago, my manager asked me, who would I most like to write a movie for? And I said, well, obviously Martin Scorsese, because he's, in my view, the greatest living film director. And I grew up watching his movies. And then he said, leave it with me. And I thought, well, yeah. I'll leave it with you. And then I got offered this book that Scorsese had read and really loved. And I got to Zoom with Marty, as I call him.
Is that what you call him now?
Yeah, it's what we call him in the Marty circle. And suddenly I was commissioned to do the adaptation of this book that Marty loved, and Marty was going to produce it, produce the film, and blah blah blah. And this goes back to procrastination. So the deal was done, and did I start work immediately on my dream project, a really good book that I loved, for the director I most admired in the world? No, I did not. I did nothing. I did not put pen to paper for a year. And then the studio called up my manager and said, where the heck is the script? Where is it? And my manager called me and he goes, where is it? And I go, oh, it's coming along really well. It's coming along nicely. And eventually the studio said, well, look, we're going to fire him if he doesn't produce some pages by such and such a date. So I was in full essay crisis all over again. And I produced some pages. I produced 30 pages. And Scorsese read them and Zoomed with me and said, these are really good. When can you get it finished? I said, oh, end of January. And I worked round the clock. I actually got it done. And then I got summoned to his house in New York. And he said, I think I'd like to direct this film, if that's okay with you. I said, yes, it is. It's fine. Marty. So he'd moved from being the producer of the film to the director. And that was my dream. And supposedly it's going to be made next year. It's being scheduled, but whether it will happen.
Can you give us a bit of a sneak peek?
Oh yeah, it's been announced. It's a book called What Happens at Night by a brilliant American novelist who I must admit I'd never heard of, called Peter Cameron. And it's a sort of marriage story, mystery story, ghost story. It's quite haunting but very funny at times and strange, about a couple who go to an unnamed town in an unnamed country somewhere snowy in Northern Europe to adopt a baby in a slightly illegal orphanage. and it's about what happens to this couple, an American couple. And it's been cast. Leo DiCaprio's doing it, and Jennifer Lawrence. It's been announced.
Okay,
so
so
I don't
can
know.
I propose now, Clifton next year or the year after, we have a panel, Martin Scorsese,
Yes.
Leonardo DiCaprio, and you.
And Jennifer Lawrence.
And Jennifer
yes,
Lawrence.
Yes,
let's not forget.
yes,
Talking
we'll all
about-
come.
Can you
I don't think they're
busy.
busy. And
We ask them now.
yes, I'm sure that, yeah.
I can see
But
that working.
remember, I could be fired off the project.
No, you
So
won't.
no, you can be. Absolutely, you can get fired at any time. You're never safe as a screenwriter. You're only safe when they want the script. Once you've delivered the script, you've done your work. The script is a piece of meat that can be devoured by the studio, by the director, actors, producers. You go from being the king to being a beggar at the gates. Please let me in. Can I come and watch you working? It's a massive reduction in power from the process of writing to delivery to what you are worth thereafter, which is why it's important to carry on writing plays where the writer does have power and does have say, but it's a totally different thing as screenwriter.
Marber.
Anyway, so that was that. So that's a very long way round of smugly boasting about I have got to meet and work with my hero.
And you're going to bring him back to Clifton.
That is the hope.
Yeah.
That's the
Mark,
dream.
Who would you most
Well,
like
I
to work
can't top that. That is ridiculous.
So,
But it's weird because all the people that come to mind are people that I actually couldn't collaborate with because they're writer-directors. Like the people whose movies I most admire, and it does lean in sort of movies, are people like Paul Thomas Anderson who had no need for a screenwriter, people who write and direct their own work. So it's a sort of non-fantasy fantasy. I couldn't do it if it happened, but yeah, people like that, people like Todd Field, I don't know, just extraordinary people that write and direct their own stuff.
people like me.
People like
yes.
Yeah,
I was rather hoping you'd say I'd love Patrick Marber to direct one of my plays, but no.
Well, I was hoping to kind of make a shoulda a match today, but maybe you'll work together. I've got a feeling. Andrew, is there anyone left who you would like to work with? Because you have had the longest career of anyone on this stage.
Well, Patrick Marber.
Oh, bless you. Mr. Davies, of course.
I have so much to learn, don't I?
Yes.
Okay, so we've got a lot of deals in the pipeline. We've got a theme. We've got a panel for Clifton coming up. So I'm going to throw open the floor to questions. Who would like?
Thank you. From a film perspective, and for a less experienced screenwriter, what do you think is more important, the structure or the story?
Both. A really good story is everything, and a really good way of telling it is everything. Story and structure are sort of the same thing in a way, but what I do know about screenwriting is they often only read the first page. People who read screenplays at studios or at streamers have got a stack of scripts that high, and you have to be brilliant from the first line down to the bottom of the first page, and then brilliant on page 2. The rest can be crap, but you've got to grab them very, very early these days. It's called a cold opening, I have learnt, where there's always a cold opening in a Bond film where there's some irrelevant bit of action that might have some bearing on the story, but usually doesn't. And that's called a cold opening, where it's not even part of the story, really. And the more you watch TV, you'll see now that the habit on any 6-part series is there's a cold opening, some weird thing that happens that makes you want to keep going, because you've got to solve that mystery. And then they'll do half an hour of boring exposition, but you can't start with exposition. But you find a great story. That's always the thing I'm looking for, is not really the characters, because I can I can do them, and I can do dialogue, but story is hard.
Mark, do you want to have a go at that?
Oh, no, I mean, my experience is much less, but I think the sort of fine tuning of character and dialogue. Obviously, they're all related to each other, and structure is related to character and what characters want. But I'm writing a film at the moment. I'm finding that structure, when you've got the structure, roughly speaking, I can then go back in and really get into the sort of fine tuning of how people speak to each other and the sort of texture of those conversations. Doing it the other way can be a bit of a lost leader, I think. So structure is hugely important before you get into those finer details.
Andrew, do you agree?
Not quite really. I think there are two ways of doing it, which is you start with the structure, which is probably the best way, and the best teacher I had of that was Robert Altman, whom I worked with for about a year in little bits and bobs, and he was great. And his way of doing it was he would get me to tell the story to him and to other people, and that is something that stuck with me. And you find you can tell it, you tell the story of a film like it was a real experience, like it happened to you or some friend of yours, and you notice when people are getting excited and when they're, kind of looking at their watches, and that's a good thing to do before you start writing. But on the other hand, sometimes writing is the big adventure. And recently, I've just started writing scripts. I just start at the beginning and see what's going to happen, which is, I don't recommend that as a way to write successful things, because you finish up writing something with no direction at all. But it's kind of amusing.
I think it is very useful as a writer to have a smart and slightly cynical 17 or 18-year-old in your life who you can tell your ideas to and your stories to. You want someone smart and young who is not afraid to look downcast when they're bored by the idea. And I fortunately have 3 children who are smart and tough with me. And when I talk them through an idea that I've had or a thing, you can see it in the eyes or in the words that come out of their mouths of, "Forget it, Dad, you old fart." I think they're a really good audience, because I think really, if I had to say who I'm writing for, I think I'm writing for my 17-year-old self. I'm writing for the me that I am no longer, that person who wanted to see everything and was completely enthusiastic about anything to do with art, and had an open mind, but a slightly, come on then, impress me attitude. And I think that person I still want to impress.
You're a bit like that, Mark. I've known Mark since we were both 16, and I remember the passion for theatre. You always, from such a young age, wanted to do this.
Yeah, but not right. So yeah, I loved watching other people's stuff, and I wanted to direct. But yeah, I learned a lot about structure and dramaturgy from directing other people's stuff, which has definitely helped. But then when you start writing it, it's a whole, you're just suddenly blundering into a whole world of mistakes. That when I wrote Giant, I had a treatment. In fact, Patrick might not remember, but I rented your room and wrote the treatment for this play in his spare room in Angel.
I don't think you rented it. I think I donated it. I think
Actually, I don't know what money changed hands, and I don't know. I'm now confused as to what it changed
I
hands
gave
for.
you a room of your own for you to create in.
The patron of the arts.
Yes, I believe so. It was a philanthropic gesture.
No,
and
but I
a tiny little cut of the royalties in perpetuity.
Okay, we've got time for one more question. Andrew.
Your mention of being what you were like when you were 17,
Yes.
Patrick.
Well, you were there.
I was,
Yes.
absolutely. We were
I was at school
together.
with Andrew.
Yes, and I remember a story about you. I just want to know whether it's true.
Oh, God.
This is half a century ago, obviously,
Yes.
but nonetheless. When our English master, Mr. Talbot,
John, yes.
John, asked the whole class to write an uplifting poem, and some boys handed in stuff about sort of lambs gambling in the fields and others about sort of flowers in spring. The story about you goes that you handed in a poem entitled A Summer Hanging. Is that true?
I wrote a lot of poetry in those days.
Can you confirm or deny?
I think I did write a poem called A Summer Hanging. I think I did. But I'll fish it out of my juvenilia file and send it to you. But I think I did. The title jogs something in me.
Well, on that incredibly uplifting note, I want to thank all of you. I could have gone on forever. I haven't even touched the surface of all the questions, which means you all have to come back. Thank you very, very much, Patrick, Mark, and Andrew, for an absolutely fascinating discussion.